Choice, your creative superpower. We have the power to manifest as we dedicate attention to our thoughts, but often miss opportunity to achieve the greatest good. Your superpower is waiting to be unleashed to unlock a fuller, more rewarding world for all. Join us every Thursday at noon Mountain Time for Choice, your creative superpower with Zoe Muro. And now, here's Zoe.
Folks, welcome to the New Thought Media Network. My name is Zoe Muro, and as always, I am delighted to be your host for Choice, your creative superpower. Coming to you from Oakland, California. Excuse me. Coming to you from Oakland, California, each Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific Time, 12 p.m. Mountain Time. We explore how you can wield your superpower for the greatest good as you co-create your life experience. If you're coming back, hey, it's so good to see you here again. And if this is your first time, welcome to the show. I'm a religious science practitioner with the New Thought Media Network. I'm also a transformational coach. I work with people who are looking to live their lives to the fullest. Today's episode 37, we'll be exploring the relationship between choice and communication. I absolutely love this topic. It's hard to imagine a more important skill than communication. I mean, think about it. It allows us to connect, to inform, to learn, to question, to answer. Communication allows us to create, to strengthen, and to deepen relationships. It provides us another outlet for presenting our identity. Now, bringing this to the spiritual level, communication provides a way for us to co-create our life experience and influence the life experience of others. I like to use Google searches as one of my ways to see the relative importance of a topic in popular thought. Communication clocked in at an astounding 7.79 billion entries. I think it's on people's minds. You know, in his iconic book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey, in habit number 5, seek first to understand, says, and I quote, "Communication is the most important skill in life." A skill that's noted time and again by authors, philosophers, coaches, teachers alike, all of them seeing how crucial it is to the success in life. You know, we communicate in so many different ways. You know, even if we're sitting alone in a room, we can still communicate. We communicate with ourselves, as well as, if you're so inclined, with God, loving spirit, Gaia, what have you, the universe. So whether or not we consciously choose to communicate, odds are we already are in some fashion. Now, we communicate, of course, through our words. We probably think of this as being the greatest aspect of communication, or the most common aspect. We also communicate with our facial expression, our body language, how we dress, how we move, even with the energy field we produce, regardless of whether we're aware of it or not. So the first choice relative to communication that I'd like to highlight is choosing to be conscious and aware of how we communicate. Communication that is clear and conscious can make many things far simpler in life, and therefore it is well worth pursuing. So much so, I've made it a priority in my own life to hone my communication skills. Now, granted, as a practitioner and a transformational coach, effective communication is the lifeblood of my work. And the attention I've placed on communication has absolutely benefited me tremendously, both in my ministry and in my personal life. So let's take a look at the word communication itself, because I think understanding its origin actually can help in how we choose to view it and engage in it. So the dictionary says, communication is the exchange of thoughts, messages, or information as by speech, signals, writing, or behavior. The Latin word it derives from is communicatus, which in addition to communicating is about sharing, imparting, informing, and quite literally making common. Making common. Okay. Now, it's important to note that each of these aspects of communication requires what I'll refer to essentially as a sender and a receiver. Okay. So the next time you think about your communications, consider whether there really was a completed circuit from sender to receiver. Okay. And then, at least theoretically, if you're communicating, back again in some way, shape, or form. Now, if I'm speaking English to someone and I'm trying to explain something that I really feel they need to know, but they have no knowledge of English whatsoever, I'm certainly not communicating. I'm sending, but no one is really receiving. So unless you want to consider that I might very well be communicating through my feeling of frustration. Now, that example is simple enough to understand, but I want to make it a little more complicated and therefore a little more substantive. Consider that with anything that affects two people or more, if we want to communicate effectively, it would be most advantageous to choose to address what I'm going to call the twins of effectiveness, the intent of the sender and the impact on the receiver. Now, unfortunately, at times, what we say and what is heard or what is understood, not necessarily in sync. So communication is, of course, about the message, but it's also about how the message is sent, how it's received, and how it's packaged. That is, how it's worded, whether it's expressed literally in words or not. It's also about follow through. Sometimes that could be as simple as the person answering the actual question that was asked, an indication that the communication worked. Other times, however, it requires that we ensure what we said was actually heard and understood. Before I got my hearing aids, I had this really terrible patch of time where people would say something to me. They'd ask me a question. I would respond, and they would look at me with this quizzical look, and off they'd go. I finally figured out, when someone was good enough to explain it to me, what was happening was I wasn't answering the question that was asked. I was answering the question that I heard. And believe me, sometimes I was way far off. But for whatever reason, that aspect of communication wasn't important for them to really work through. For me, however, it was extremely important, hence the hearing aids came into place. Now, no matter how clearly, how eloquently, how decisively we express something, there is no guarantee that what we expressed was heard or that it had the impact that we intended. As a writer and a speaker, this is something I must address every day, and certainly in my coaching work. As a husband, a father, a brother, a friend, well, let's just say sometimes I need to work a little bit more on my ability to communicate effectively, to ensure that my intent and the effect are in sync. You know, you can think of every instance of communication as a sort of relationship. Now, if you listened to my talk on relationships, or of course, if you've done any reading about it, the heart of a relationship is reasonably relating, connecting. No connection, no relationship. So this is a good time to remind you, I know we just did this recently, but let me remind you again of Stephen Covey's fifth habit of highly successful people. Seek first to understand. You know, if you're not getting through to the other person, you can choose, all right? You can choose to say the exact same thing again, right? Or if you're intent on continuing the stereotype of the ugly American, just get louder and louder as you repeat the same thing again and again. Or you can choose to try to understand where the disconnect lies. Because understand, I mean, we're talking about this circuit, if you will, this sending and receiving. The problem could be on either side, could be on both sides. So when attempting to communicate, let's make this really simple. If you choose to work from the perspective of what's mine to do, you will typically communicate far more effectively. So what falls into the category of what's mine to do? Well, here are some things that you can choose to do. You can choose to be clear about your message. What is it you really want to communicate? Now, that might seem like kind of a silly thing. It's a no-brainer. But you'd be surprised at how often what seems straightforward to you is unclear or confusing to another person. I know, for example, that on some of these talks, I've had people come back and say, you know, there was so much information there that I heard what you said, I understood what you said, but I needed to go back. I needed to hear it again. I needed to listen again. Okay. Now, this is something that I'm doing live here, obviously. And if you have a question, you could put it into the chat, or you could write to me. By the way, you can write to me here. Okay, at zodemuro@gmail.com. But when we are speaking with someone directly, we have an opportunity to understand exactly where they are. Did they catch what we were saying or not? Oh, hello, Fiona. Good to see you. Okay, let's see. Where was I? All right. So we're talking about things that you can choose to do relative to communication to ensure that your communication is as effective as possible. So, knowing your message, first and foremost. Know your audience, your receiver, if you will. Now, this can mean choosing to understand a number of things, some of which might be a bit surprising. Now, what tone of voice do they respond to best? If you're in a situation where someone is fearful, being loud and having a voice that's very commanding might not be the best thing. On the other hand, if you're trying to really rally people and get them excited and just bring up that energy, you don't want to be whispering. You don't want to be mild. You want to get the point across. Let's see. Are you springing something on your receiver, your audience, that they might not have considered at all? Which could easily cause them to kind of sit back and say, well, I need to think about this. All right. You have to be aware of those types of interactions. Do you have a track record of good or problematic communication with this particular individual? If you do, then you know that you want to ensure that you have indeed communicated effectively. Are you addressing a topic that they might find to be triggering? Very common issue, very common issue. Sometimes we can prepare for that. Sometimes we cannot. If you are aware of the other person, if you have that ability to actually see or feel what's going on with them, by all means, check in. See if you need to soft pedal a bit, or you need to give them a chance to just kind of ease into the conversation. You need to choose the best way to communicate with people. Some people react better to in-person conversations. Other people prefer a phone call, a text, or an email. And that might be situational. If you're not feeling well, for example, receiving a phone call from someone who's wishing you well, as sweet as that might be, you might not want to speak to anybody. All right. You might be the type of person that never looks at email. So sending something really important in email, or being sent something important in email, you're not going to reach them. Okay. So it's always a good idea to get an understanding of how people like to be communicated with. And understand that applies not just to these mechanical mechanisms, if you will, but all of the different things that we're talking about here. Choose to simplify or expand upon your communication to ensure your message received and understood. Which means you need to know when more is needed and when less is more. Okay. I think communication is absolutely both a science and an art. Now, with that in mind, choose to ensure that you don't, quote unquote, bury the lead. I love this expression. It comes from journalism, actually. The lead is the introductory section in a journalism piece. Burying the lead means hiding the most important and relevant pieces of a story within other distracting or irrelevant information. On the other hand, sometimes it's actually better to choose to build up to a particular point. Again, knowing your audience can help with this. So if you're going to be dealing with something that is particularly stressful or difficult or complex, controversial, whatever it might be, diving in might not serve you well. If you're trying to provide a warning about something, get the warning across. That's important. All right. And then you can talk about mitigating it. I want to look at some of the forms of communication that we use. I want to see our choices involved in each of these. We've mentioned the spoken word. If we want our communication to be most effective and accurate, there's more to it than the literal words of the message. I had mentioned the idea of the tone of voice, the volume, the speed, the physical clarity. By that, I mean speaking distinctly as opposed to mumbling or whispering, for example. All of that can make a huge difference. Then the words we choose themselves, the actual words, can be a benefit or a detriment. And that point can be applied to any form of spoken or written communication. Excuse me. Jargon. Jargon is a huge potential offender. Many industries and organizations and communities have a number of words or phrases that carry a very specific meaning, which is basically the definition of jargon, which can easily be misunderstood, or it can be completely perplexing to your receiver. And it could be something as simple as using initials for things that you assume everybody knows. Okay, PSA. What does PSA mean? Well, it could mean prostate-specific antigen. I know this as someone who has prostate cancer. It's a thing that I look at every 6 months. What is my PSA level? Or PSA is public service announcement. All right. Without context, that does not mean anything to anyone. Think about people who join your organization, join your group, join your community, and the terms that you use on a regular basis with one another, the little slang expressions and the shortcuts and the abbreviations and such. Are they going to know what those mean? Are they going to be comfortable in your environment if they're unaware of what these things mean? The same concern applies to what I'll call colloquialisms or to slang. In fact, these days, for those of us who strive to be the best allies we possibly can, we definitely need to look at our vocabulary. There are a number of expressions that are actually quite offensive to different people. And it's always important to be as informed, as aware, as vigilant as possible. Will you be able to avoid any and all vocabulary missteps? Probably not. But you can choose to educate yourself, and you can choose not to be offended if you're corrected on your usage, but to learn. Remember, when we are communicating, we are relating if we're being effective. Being able to meet people where they are and then expressly choosing to do so is an important part of effective communication. If you see yourself as an ally, without a doubt, you are relating. And therefore, you want to communicate as effectively as possible. Years ago, Years ago, I took speech lessons to get rid of a very strong accent. I lived in New York City for nearly half my life. Well, so far, nearly half my life, because I really have to say I look forward to being an ever decreasing percentage. Now, there you go. There's extraneous information for you. That didn't help any in terms of what I'm getting to. But anyway, where am I going? Oh, yeah, I remember. I was working in Midtown Manhattan, Park Avenue. The majority of the higher level positions in the company I worked for at that time, they were all held by people from the Midwest and the South in the United States. My New York City accent, or more specifically, my Brooklyn accent, held me back for quite a while because I sounded unintelligent. It wasn't the words that I used, it was the way that I spoke them. The fact that the higher ups all had accents that were odd to my ear, well, that didn't matter because they were the bosses. And something, speaking of accents, everyone has an accent. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you grew up. Everyone has an accent. We don't talk about accents unless what we're hearing is something different from what we're used to. Now, I bring up this ability to communicate effectively relative to accents because it really caused me a problem. So sometimes we don't get to choose how the message we're transmitting is received. And sometimes we can become aware and we can learn and we can adapt. Oh, by the way, I did not try to sound like them. I didn't try to sound like the Southerners or the Midwesterners. You've got to go along to get along. Nah. I did, however, as I said, get speech training. And my trainer had me study network news broadcast anchors, which enabled me to speak with an accent that was acceptable to all. Some people refer to it as kind of a bland or a no accent, but as I said, everyone has an accent. But it was something that, because it's national news, everyone hears it, everyone's used to it. And the terminology that they use, the phrasing, the manner of speech, all of that falls into a particular category that was acceptable. So that's what I learned. Now, I have found what is comfortable and natural for me, and I don't necessarily still speak the same way that I was trained. Although I do have to say that if I'm stressed or excited or tired, you might very well hear the Brooklyn come out. On a more serious issue, though, some women are faced with a problem because of the lightness, the high tone of their voice. Because it's soft and significantly more treble than it is bass, they may not be perceived as being as businesslike or not taken as seriously. That's discrimination, folks. Let's be clear about that. I've never heard a woman say that another woman's voice was too light or too high. It's simply an issue in a male-dominant culture where oftentimes the loudness, the brashness, the deepness of a voice is seen as being preferable, as being a leader. Please. To be clear, it's also not uncommon for a woman to be seen as being too pushy or strident when she does use a strong tone, especially for women of color. I really wish I had a good choice for anyone in this situation to make, but all I can say is the best choice, you do you. You do you. Don't take a back seat. Don't sit down. Don't be quiet. While it did take centuries for women to become voters, we are making significant, if not rapid, strides towards true equality. So let your voice be heard. No pun intended, folks. But I want to move on to another form of communication. I'm going to run late today. I don't care. Nonverbal communication, body language. The very term speaks to it as communication. And frankly, because our, excuse me, frankly, sometimes our body language can speak even louder than our spoken words do. Have you ever had someone greet you with a warm smile and kind words, and yet their eyes are darting all over the room? Have you ever watched someone who has agreed to go somewhere? Yet their shoulders are stooped and they drag their feet, figuratively and literally? Have you ever watched someone at a meeting who's nodding in agreement and saying, yes, yes, but their arms are folded tight, they lean back in their chair? Their lips are clamped tight, they're not making eye contact. Yeah, we read body language all the time, and we need to. According to numerous well-executed studies over decades now, the percentage of nonverbal communication that we use to communicate with one another, somewhere around 60 to 65%. 60 to 65%. So just as we make our verbal communication more effective by the choices we make, so too can we make body language more effective. And clearly the benefits, 60 to 65%, the benefits are well worth the effort. One of the best things you can choose to do regarding body language is to make a concerted effort to be aware of what your body language is conveying. Are you talking about something that's of primary importance, but you don't make eye contact, you sit back, you slouch, you fidget? These can all be taken as signs of indecisiveness or uncertainty. You might be crystal clear in your own mind, absolutely, but that didn't translate through your words. They were being overshadowed by your body language. On the plus side, consciously choosing how you use your body language can make a more significant impact than words alone. So understand your environment, understand the situation, understand the context in which you are conversing, you are communicating, and allow your body language to be consistent with your message, consistent with the environment, consistent with the situation. All right, folks, I want to wrap this up here. I'm well aware there are many more examples we could talk through, but in the interest of time, I want to recap. So when it comes to communication, we can and would benefit from a number of choices. For example, be clear in your message. Choose to know your audience. Choose to consider the best medium for your communication, spoken, written, etc. Choose to be aware of and to consciously employ the appropriate wording, tone, and volume. Choose to be aware of and to be in alignment with your body language. Perhaps most importantly, choose when to communicate. Even the most important message, crafted perfectly, delivered perfectly, can be inappropriate in a given time or place, so that the ability to truly communicate is lost. Well, that's it for today, folks. I would love to hear what your ideas regarding choice and communication are. And I encourage you to email me at zodemuro@gmail.com. Let me get that up there. There we go. I always hold whatever you share with me in complete confidence, of course. And I would love to know what topics relating to choice you'd like to see me address in a future episode. I'd even be delighted to have you come onto the show to discuss an aspect of choice. Doesn't even have to be something new. It could be something that we've already covered. The more that we talk about these things, the more we learn. Folks, I do truly appreciate you spending this time with me. I want you to go to ntmedia.org and see all that we have going on. Today, coming up in just about 25 minutes at 12 noon Pacific time, which is 1 p.m. Mountain time, Finding the Joy in the Journey with the vibrant Reverend Gina Calvario-Krupka and her special guest, Reverend Chris Lahiff. If you're looking for prayer, meditation, information, discussion, we've got it, and more. It takes time, it takes talent, and yes, it takes treasure. So if you can find it in your heart to go to ntmedia.org/donate. Greatly appreciate your helping us bring all that we can out into this world to make this a world that works for everyone. I look forward to seeing you again next week. And until we do meet again, choose well, choose wisely. Namaste.
Choice, your creative superpower. We have the power to manifest as we dedicate attention to our thoughts, but often miss opportunity to achieve the greatest good. Your superpower is waiting to be unleashed to unlock a fuller, more rewarding world for all. Join us every Thursday at noon Mountain Time for Choice, your creative superpower with Zo DeMuro.